The first question we have is what makes recruiting volunteers different from paid employees? And the second follow-up to that question is, what are some ways
paid, that's the benefit, you know, you're doing it for the pay. So either way, it's a choice, but when you're getting paid, that's the incentive. But the volunteer, they do it for a different reason, because either they have a passion for it or they are motivated, or, I mean, I know volunteers that do it for school credit, but there's always a motive behind it, but it's different than making money.
Yeah, I'm just going to say something.
Oh, go ahead and then I'll do it.
Oh.
It's okay.
Yeah, I think that in line with what Jesus was saying, that I think it has to do with motivation. I think the difference, I think the motivation for the vast majority of people who both volunteer and who work in the paid field is the sense of purpose, that they feel some compulsion to want to do this as a benefit to their community or to the city at large. Then there are other benefits that you get from this, so you get paid. There's lots of other ways to make good money than become a fireman or a policeman. But, you know, there's a strong emotional attachment for either from, you know, like bloodline or family, or just a sense of wanting to protect the community in which you live or the community that you're serving. And it's the same thing for volunteers, you know. I mean, I started back in '72 and you know, at that time, volunteers, you know, were needed. I mean, the city services, they weren't that organized, they weren't that great. And it was, my sister used the volunteer ambulance in the community. It saved her life. And it was like, yeah, this is, I want to help out. And I think that there are people who also see this as a pathway to join volunteers, to go on to professional service. But it's not sustainable if your heart's not really in it. And I think that there are people who start off because their heart was in it and wanted to serve, and then found this was a pathway into other areas of healthcare. So there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with wanting to gain experience, but your heart needs to be in it. And I think that that's the way that most people go into any area of community service, paid or unpaid.
Are we talking about retention or no?
Right.
We will, yeah, we are.
Well, and then
we're going to go, yes.
right. And I think that was that's not, I didn't answer the question.
No, because I didn't write.
That's going to be the next question, sort of like, how are you? So, but.
Yeah, and I think that how well that meets your goal is how you retain people. So if you create the environment that makes their expectations met, you know, through training, through education, through a sense of camaraderie and encouragement, that, yeah, I think that is what sustains and helps you to retain the people who come. People who are ignored, people who don't feel that they're really part of the worthwhile organization, are not motivated to stay.
So if I were to ask a young new volunteer about this, and sort of to that question of what would makes you show up, and what would make you stay?
Don't say parole officer.
Right.
Well, I got a report where I can. The mic doesn't work.
Oh, no, because it's just being recorded.
It's just being
Oh, it's being
Yes,
recorded.
yeah.
Yes.
Wonderful.
So we can watch you now.
Well, I've been in volunteer EMS for now 4 months, so I'm a very fresh face. And
And I show up because what you said, Andrew, that there's a desire to help the community. There's a desire to be there for people. I want to help people and I want to be involved. And with that, I feel like an important aspect of addressing the motivation for people to volunteer is giving them recognition for what they do, making sure that they know they're appreciated, that they know they're important, that what they do is a step above and beyond, in order to prevent people from burning out, feeling like they're, as the chief of the EMS was saying, feel invisible. So that's my perspective. That recognition and acknowledgement from all levels of the chain of command are important.
I think regardless of whether it's volunteer or paid, there's, a certain amount of egocentric motives that everybody has for doing whatever they do. I think that volunteering, it's particularly also solidarity, an interest in helping the community, an interest in self-fulfillment that, drives a lot of people in different ways to want to be active and engaged, to have a environment where they feel welcome, where it's a positive experience to do. And how do we create that? I think that all becomes, particularly important. The financial incentive in EMS compared to fire or police isn't really great, except maybe for the city service. Most of the proprietary services and even some of the smaller municipal services, the salaries aren't, great. People are often looking at it as a stepping stone to another career path. So I think, there's some overlap both in the career in EMS's case and in the volunteer in EMS's case about why people come into EMS.
I think that retention and recruitment are connected very much so. However, I think also understanding and accepting who you're going to be retaining and how long you're going to be retaining them directly affects your recruitment. So for instance, my organization came to the conclusion that yes, we would love to retain everyone for extended periods of time, but realistically, our average member on it, who's an active member who comes through orientation and is active, will be there for 24 months and then we'll move on. So how do we embrace them for those 24 months? How do we try to bring them into leadership roles? And the ones that do express a desire to move into leadership, how do we create an environment for them to be there? And then for the folks that are there for 24 months, how do we make it that they get the most out of their experience? And we, as an organization, get the most out of them being a member of the organization servicing the community. And I think the biggest place where that starts and where recruitment starts is where they come into the organization, right? How easy is it for them to do that? How easy is it for them to become active riding members? What are the steps that prevent them from being actively involved?
Yeah, I think what's important is that all too often in many organizations, that's a mystery. It's not transparent enough of what does the person have to do to get to where they want to be in the organization. And I think if we all are better at that, that certainly helps in terms of people knowing what the path is. And I think that in a lot of organizations, that path is not as clear as it could be or should be. And I think that would help. And we do a fair amount of our recruiting in the high schools and colleges, among other things. And I think on average, if you look at EMS as a profession overall, except for the large services, and even there's a turnover issue, the average turnover seems to be 4 or 5 years. So, we're lucky, those of us who've been around for longer than that are almost unusual in that regard. But, I think you hit a couple of nails on the head there.
On retention, I just want to put it. So basically, we've all been the new member, right? So we all felt that unappreciated. We all, basically what makes us different than the people who leave is that we're dedicated to helping. And that's where we're at. But I do believe that a great way to retain members is to show them that they are appreciated, and not just on EMS week, throughout the entire year. Which is stuff that we have to implement within our own organizations as well. It's just not as easy as saying, oh yeah, you know what, we're gonna do something for the membership this week. Everything comes down to a vote. And if everybody's not on the same thought path, it's hard to get something approved, especially when you have to spend money, even though you should spend the money to show the appreciation.
Okay, as far as recruitment and retention, Lewis pointed out, Henry pointed out, I call it the cyclical cycle. One overlaps the other and transposes back to the other in one way, shape, or form. Recruitment, on average, yields 30% of what your take is. And those 30%, as Lewis and Henry pointed out, is anywhere from 2 to 5 years. So during that time, you have to keep them active, engaged, and feeling like they want to be there. Unfortunately, a lot of the younger recruits today is what's in it for me? What do I get out of it? Some of it is resume building. It's a different cycle now as it was 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago. And then you'll still get your group that likes it, loves it, can't get enough of it. It's a smaller group, but it's there. So you have to balance who you're taking in. And in our organization, we identify those that we feel are going to excel, can get on the ambulance, because at the end of the day, if our trucks don't move, that's our billboard. That's our agency. Trucks don't move. No one knows you exist. You're only as good as your last call, your last event, and your last public speaking engagement. So if you can identify early on who your stars are coming in, get them trained, get them out on the truck, keep them motivated. That's the key. Everyone's got to be motivated as we move forward. Then you have about a 40% chance at keeping that person. And yes, the money factor, plays a part, but as we know, the more we do, the larger the agency grows, the money will find its way. The end all be all is if you're not out there, you can't ask for the money because you're not doing the service. We have a lot of agencies that are, crying, unfortunately, for money, but they're not doing the service. So it just doesn't, those two come hand in hand. Because if you're not servicing your community, you can't ask for the money and you can't expect it, and you can't expect the recognition from your community when those three pieces do not exist.
You mentioned that it's important to identify who the high potential candidates are, who your stars are early on, but how do you do that?
That's a good point. There's no scientific method. It's a whack. All right. At the end of the day, you got to look at who's coming in. You got to see where they're coming from. Your application, you can ask questions on that application that do not breach any federal laws. And you can find out enough about the candidate of where they're heading, what their ideals are, about why they're coming in. And you can determine whether they're going to want to go ahead and advance. We're not turning people away, but if we know these 4 candidates, if we put them into an EMT class, they're going to be around for 4 years, but this candidate is maybe going to get into a class. They're going to sit and help us administratively or operationally around the office, maybe 6 months to a year. We're going to fast track the person that has the capability to move our truck out on the street and service the community. You know, again, no science behind it, but you got to try, you got to gamble, you got to take a risk, and you just got to come up with new mousetraps as it comes around.
Look, there are a variety of volunteer match websites out there that you can put notices on, New York City Services, Volunteer Match, and there's a whole bunch of others, plus doing some direct recruiting, high schools, colleges, various organizations where you think you might get members. But one of the greatest tools that we found is just being out in the community on a regular basis. It almost astounds us that because people saw us doing a standby at a school, covering a special event, doing first aid at the Queens County Farm, covering the mini marathon race or the bike-a-thon, and people seeing us out in the community, how that has generated a fair amount of traffic. And as Jerry said, it's the questions you ask on your application. It's your interview process. It's drawing from somebody like yourself is, what's your interest? What are your goals? Why do you want to be here? And then you make a judgment. It sounds like, hey, this person sounds like he's really going to be into the service. It's something he wants to do. And then I would say to somebody like you, well, when you came into the organization, what would you suggest to them as things that were good about the process that you went through to get to be a member in good standing? And what do you think could have been better?
One of the things I noticed about retention and keeping volunteers is actually keeping them, interested in what they're doing. Also finding out what their strong points are. A lot of us get volunteers who aren't EMTs, which we all want EMTs more and more, but we still get the ones who we call radio buffs, who may like to listen to the radio 365 days a year. Let's try to put them into more communication. Let them feel wanted in that aspect. You have EMTs who've been riding on the trucks for a certain amount of time, and they have, like Jerry said, a strong EMTs, and we see that. Are you able to be a trainer? Because I know a lot of us lack the ability to have field training officers, so we can show the new EMTs the right way to actually do the job, or the way that we would want them to do the job. Are you strong enough to be a field training officer? Are you strong enough to be an officer? Are you like community affairs or community relations, whereas you're going out in the community and showing the work that the organization is doing and things of that sort. So once you get the volunteers, find out their strong points and put them and guide them into that direction, instead of, because I know a lot of us like to keep them on the truck. Getting the truck running is, of course, our number one priority, but also keeping the volunteers. They can do a job. They can ride the ambulance, but if we need somebody to say, hey, take some pamphlets and go to a health fair and share information about the organization, that's one way we can definitely keep the volunteers in.
All right. I'm actually going to move on. I'm going to have one person has an anonymous comment, and then I'm going to ask another question, which is actually tying off of yours. So this person says, finding who is intrinsically or extrinsically motivated early in the application process is key. Someone looking to boost a med school application who has near future plans to leave the area shouldn't necessarily be prioritized. So
Can I just quickly jump in on that?
Sure.
I would actually disagree with that statement. I do it respectfully, and I can understand we need to have people that are going to be with an organization for a period of time. But I can say from firsthand experience, we actually did the opposite. We looked at those members who are going to be with us for the shorter periods of time, right? And so, of course, we want them to be with us a minimum of 6 months to a year, because there is some upfront training. But when we realized that we were going to be a stepping stone for the med school student, for the PA student, the nursing student, someone looking to go into law enforcement or somewhere else in the emergency services, we all of a sudden were able to set ourselves up to embrace those people, and we expanded our workforce exponentially. So I would disagree that we want to push those people away, but I think as an organization, we need to acknowledge how long are those folks going to be with us, and what is the best use for them as part of the organization.
All right, excellent. So the next question really is ties in. Do you actively recruit non-medical personnel? And if you do, why? If you don't, why?
Well, we recruit at Best Eye, we recruit a variety of men. We recruit EMTs, of course, because we need the truck to run, but we also recruit non-EMT personnel because those are the ones like basically your support services. Those are the ones that while the EMTs are focusing on running the ambulance, you know, getting calls in and doing things like standbys and stuff like that. Then you have the non-EMT personnel who can be your dispatchers, who can be the ones that are going to the events and sitting there and handing out information and stuff like that. You have those who are CPR instructors that may can do CPR demonstrations. And those that just want to feel, there's people that just want to come in and just, you know, clean up and throw out the garbage every day just to say that they're a part of something. Like you have those type of people. So, you know, taking everyone is something that I feel is good to the organization.
I agree with what he's saying, and also there's different roles. It's not just get on a truck and go. There's other behind the scenes stuff that has to be had as well, especially with every organization. And like I said, even like he said, even as throwing out the garbage is an important role. And a lot of people, especially EMTs, think they're too good to throw out the garbage. So, you know, you have to bring in volunteers and people to facilitate every role of the organization. And this way, the organization will run properly.
Our organization for years, we take everyone that walks through the door. Obviously, that meets the criteria that you could take them after various checks. But the bottom line is from a volunteer EMS perspective, you don't know who your next leader is. So we had a partner of mine many years ago, probably like 30. She came in as her kids were older and she came in as a housewife and needed something to do during the day. And basically she was doing stuff around the building. She became an EMT and I would drive her around and we'd do calls all day long and she moved up in the ranks of the organization. So even today, you have to take that same philosophy that while you might fast track people with EMT cards, you have to look even down to the level of, you know, our agency has about 30 youth squad members that are at various levels in their education career. We don't know how many of those 30 are going to stay with us, how many are going to move on, but we provide training for them. We provide information about how the system works. And we hope to give them enough knowledge and interest that when they do get of age and can ride the ambulance, that they stay with us for a few years. So yet you have to use everything at your disposal. And the one other thing is, as an agency, we got to give them the tools. You got to be progressive. You know, if times change, you got to increase and improve your equipment. You got to improve the image. You got to improve the agency so you can attract people from all different avenues and all walks of life, from 14 to 40 and above.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, we all face with issues of recruitment and I agree with pretty much all of the ideas that were said about how visibility in the community is a great retention tool. That embracing the fact that there are some people who are motivated towards service to mankind, if you want to use that, but not necessarily on the ambulance, but as a vehicle to get into their chosen profession, may spend a limited period of time, let's say 2 years. And I think that those should not be, they should be encouraged as opposed to shunned. But I think also one of the best recruitment tools is from within the organization itself. In other words, if you have a happy volunteer who really loves what they do, they're more likely to draw someone in. And that sort of goes to something that I wanted to say before about retention even. It's that it's not just motivation, but it has to be nurtured. we need to do a better job, I think, at mentoring the people who come there, so that older people who like myself, I don't get much older than me, but people who've been around a long time, have gifts to share with those. And I think that if you do it the right way, it creates a bond between that person. In the same way, developing a sense of camaraderie. I know things have changed, but when I started back in '72, it was like you really wanted to be there. These were like older guys. It was like a fireman. It was an EMS supervisor, Jamaica. It was all sorts of people there. It was a wide diversity of community people. But I mean, yeah, you used to hang out. They used to play pinochle. They were there. It was like you wanted to be there. All the crews used to cook a meal when they were on there. They had a community meal, and so it was like you wanted to be a part of this group of people. And yet when you went out on the bus, I mean, you had stories to share, and they used to, sometimes they would say, well, if you had this, what would you do? It was like you developed things in a way that made people want to be a part of what was there. And if they got that degree of satisfaction, they are more likely to draw other people in with them. And those become, the more likely to become your lifers, as opposed to your short-term people, as opposed to your revolving door people who, I'm sure a lot more people show up than actually ever like fulfill even the first few months before they're out the door again. And it's like, was that because they were never motivated in the first place, or the first few times there, they just said, oh my God, do I really want to be here with these people? And it's like, and I think that's where we can step up our game as well.
We probably don't do nearly as good a job at recruiting non-operational members as we should. And I think we don't do as well as our colleagues in the fire service do at retaining our members who are no longer able, for lack of a better word, of staying on the ambulance. You look at fire departments and the ex-chief, the ex-officers, the ex-firefighters, they're always doing something for the department, whether it's they're the bookkeeper, they're the guy that comes in and cleans up and checks the rig out. They're the person that takes the photos and helps with the public relations. We don't do that as nearly as well as we could and should. It seems to be that, oh, I can't be on the ambulance anymore, so, I don't want to be involved, or it seems like the agency doesn't want me anymore. And I think we have to change that mentality.
One of the things that we can do is in organizations, what we do is we highlight certain positions. Like we make the EMTs on the ambulance feel good. Sometimes I know that's what I did at one point in time. Like I only focus on the EMTs on the truck, but then the person who's just, like I said, randomly coming around and sweeping up, they should want to feel, welcome, and want to feel like they're a part of the family too, not just somebody who's just coming to clean up. So we just need to highlight all the pieces of the organization, just instead of just highlighting, one or two specific, titles or, let's say, positions.